Robert Fisk is a Middle East correspondent for the London Independent. Based in Beirut for more than 30 years, he writes about his experiences in the new book, The Great War for Civilization. Next, he's interviewed by Laura Flanders, host of The Laura Flanders Show on Air America Radio. This is an hour and a half.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, of course, I have to thank Patrick and the Lannan Foundation for this award. Winning awards is always flattering for journalists, especially when we're far from home. But in the Middle East, where you sometimes have to take the sticks and stones for trying to tell the truth, occasionally literally, awards like this are also a kind of protection. You're able to say to someone who wants to send you a snotty letter or an anonymous letter, or what I've occasionally got, postcards telling me that my mother is Adolf Eichmann's daughter, well, hang on a second. Hang on a second. Got the Lannan Award last year. So this is not just an award which is flattering for a journalist to get. For us in the Middle East, this is a sort of flak jacket. So thank you, Patrick, and thank you to the Lannan Foundation. I want to read, first of all, an extract from my new book, The Great War for Civilization. In the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988, 1.5 million Iraqis and Iranians died. You can imagine the effect that had on the Iraqis, and they are the same Iraqis who are fighting us now in Iraq. The Battle of Fao had been won by the Iranians. Gigi Labelle of the Associated Press and I were about to take what I thought was a near-suicidal mission across the front lines to the newly captured Iranian-held Fao Peninsula. It's almost a relief to be told that we will now be taken to Fao. Just think, Fisky, Labelle says wickedly, in a short while you'll have your dateline from Robert Fisk, Iranian-occupied Fao. Outside, beneath the high, bright sun, the sand swirls around our faces, swamping our clothes and eagerly working its way down our collars. There is a clap of sound and the rush of another artillery shell whooshing off towards Basra. I climb into the helicopter. It has a maximum safety load of 8, but there are 19 of us aboard, most of them clamouring mullahs. When I must do something utterly insane, I have discovered, an unidentifiable part of my brain takes over. There are no decisions to be taken, no choices to be made. My brain is now operating independently of me. It instructs me to sit beside the open starboard door of the helicopter gunship, and I notice Labelle squatting beside me, notebook in hand. Notebook? I ask myself. He's going to take notes on this suicide mission? The growing rhythm of the rotor blades has a comforting effect, the gathering din slowly dampening the sound of the war. The crash of the artillery becomes a dull thump. The wind shears away from the blades, the first nudge off the ground, and the sudden rise above the sand. And it is the most normal thing in the world. We are immortal. As we pass through the gun line, our door remains wide open because of the heat. There is a crack, crack, crack of sound, and long pink tulips of fire grow out of the gun muzzles. A barrage as beautiful as it is awesome. One of these big flowers moves inexorably past the starboard side of our chopper, and for a moment I think I feel its heat. It hangs for a moment in the air, this magnificent blossom, until we overtake it, and a line of palms curls beneath us, and then the Shatt al-Arab River, so close that the skids of the chopper are only a foot off the water. I sit up and squint out of the pilot's window. I can see a smudge on the horizon, a black rime across the paleness of the river, and a series of broken needles that stand out on the far shoreline. The water is travelling below us at more than 100 miles an hour. We are the fastest water skiers in the world, the rotors biting through the heat, sweeping across this great expanse of river. We are safe in our cocoon, angels who can never fall from heaven, who can only marvel and try to remember that we are only human. We fly through the smoke of 2 burning oil tanks, and then Labelle bangs me on my foot with his fist and points to a mountain of mud and filth that the helicopter is now circling, and onto which it gingerly, almost carelessly sets down. Go, 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 the pilot shouts, and we jump out into the great wet mass of shell-churned liquid clay that tears off our shoes when we try to move, and which sucks at our feet and prevents us even moving clear of the blades when the chopper whoops back up into the air and leaves us in a kind of noisy silence, Labelle and I trying to hold our trousers up, the mullahs' robes caked with muck, and then as the chopper turns fly-like in the sky, we feel the ground shaking. It is vibrating as surely as if there is a minor earthquake, a steady movement of the soil beneath our feet. Smoke drifts across the mud and the shell-broken cranes of foul port, the needles I saw on the horizon, and the litter of burned-out Iraqi armour. Labelle and I struggle through the mire with the mullahs and an ascetic young man who turns out, of course, to be from the Ministry of Islamic Guidance. We can hear the incoming shells now, a continuous rumble that makes no distinction between one explosion and the next, as if we've pitched up next to a roller skating rink on which mad children roar endlessly over wooden boards. When we get to the quayside, littered with bits of mouldering bodies and hunks of crane and unexploded shells, Labelle comes staggering towards me, his feet caked in the glue-like mud. We're both exhausted, gasping for breath. "Well, Fisky," he wheezes grimly, "you've got your fucking dateline." And he shoots me the Steve McQueen grin. We walk a mile down the waterfront. There are burned oil storage tanks and captured artillery pieces. The earth and concrete are pulverized, and there are Iraqi bodies lying in the muck. One soldier has lost his head, another his arms. Both were hit by grenades. Labelle and I find a basin of sand and cement near one of the cranes and shout to the man from the ministry. But as we walk to sit down in the dirt, I see another body in a gun pit. A young man in the fetal position, curled up like a child, already blackening with death, but with a wedding ring on his finger. I am mesmerized by the ring. On this hot, golden morning, it glitters and sparkles with freshness and life. He has black hair and is around 25 years old. Or should that be, was 25 years old. Do we stop the clock when death surprises us? Do we say, as Binion wrote, that they shall grow not old as we that are left grow old? Age may not weary them, nor the years condemn, but their humanity is quickly taken from their remains by the swiftness of corruption and the jolly old sun. I look again at the ring. An arranged marriage or a love match? Where was he from, this soldier corpse? A Sunni or a Shia or a Christian or a Kurd? And his wife? He could not be more than 3 days dead. Somewhere to the north of us, his wife is waking the children, making breakfast, glancing at her husband's photograph on the wall, unaware that she is already a widow and that her husband's wedding ring, so bright with love for her on this glorious morning, embraces a dead finger. Up to 1,700 Palestinians were murdered in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in September of 1982. I was one of the first reporters to enter the camp. The murderers were the Christian Lebanese Phalangist militia sent into the camp on the orders of Defense Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon. They were everywhere, in the road, in laneways, in backyards and broken rooms, beneath crumpled masonry and across the top of garbage tips. The murderers, the Christian militiamen whom Israel had let into the camps to flush out terrorists, had only just left. In some cases, the blood was still wet on the ground. When we'd seen 100 bodies, we stopped counting. Down every alleyway, there were corpses, women, young men, babies, grandparents, lying together in lazy and terrible profusion where they had been knifed or machine-gunned to death. Each corridor through the rubble produced more bodies. The patients at a Palestinian hospital had disappeared after gunmen ordered the doctors to leave. Everywhere we found signs of hastily dug mass graves. Even while we were there, amid the evidence of such savagery, we could see the Israelis watching us. From the top of the tower block to the west, the second building on the Avenue Camille Chamoun, we could see them staring at us through field glasses, scanning back and forth across the streets of corpses, the lenses of the binoculars sometimes flashing in the sun as their gaze ranged through the camp. Lauren Jenkins of the Washington Post cursed a lot. I thought it was probably his way of controlling his feelings of nausea amid the terrible smell. We were breathing death. Jenkins immediately realized that the Israeli defense minister would have to bear some responsibility for this horror. "Sharon," he shouted, "this is Deir Yassin over again." What we found inside the Palestinian Shatila camp at 10 o'clock on the morning of the 18th of September 1982 did not beg a description, although it would have been easier to retell in the cold prose of a medical report. There had been massacres before in Lebanon, but rarely on this scale, and never overlooked by a regular, supposedly disciplined army. In the panic and hatred of battle, tens of thousands have been killed in this country of Lebanon. But these people, hundreds of them, have been shot down unarmed. This was a mass killing, an incident, how easily we use the word incident in Lebanon, that was also an atrocity. It went beyond even what the Israelis would have in other circumstances have called a terrorist atrocity. It was a war crime. Jenkins and I had darker fears. If the murderers were still in the camp, it was the witnesses rather than the photographic evidence that they would wish to destroy. We saw a brown metal gate ajar. We pushed it open and ran into the yard, closing it quickly behind us. We heard the vehicle approaching down a neighbouring road, its tracks clanking against pieces of concrete. Jenkins and I looked at each other in fear and then knew we were not alone. We felt the presence of another human. She lay just beside us, a young woman on her back. She lay there as if she was sunbathing in the heat, and the blood running from her back was wet. The murderers had just left. She just lay there, feet together, arms outspread, as if she'd seen her saviour. Her face was peaceful, eyes closed, a beautiful woman whose head was now granted a strange halo, for a clothesline hung above her, and there were children's trousers and some socks pegged to the line. Other clothes lay scattered on the ground. She must have been hanging out her family's washing when the murderers came. As she fell, the clothes pegs in her hand sprayed over the yard and formed a small wooden circle round her head. Only the insignificant hole in her breast and the growing stain across the yard told of her death. Even the flies had not yet found her. I thought Jenkins was praying, but he was just cursing again and muttering, "Dear God," in between the curses. I felt so sorry for this woman. Perhaps it was easier to feel pity for someone so young, so innocent, someone whose body had not yet begun to rot. I kept looking at her face, the neat way she lay beneath the clothesline, expecting her to open her eyes. In August of 2001, I was in Israeli West Jerusalem. Already, of course, the clock was ticking towards 9/11. A suicide bomber, Palestinian, walked into a pizzeria crowded with Israeli children. The crack of the explosion comes as a shock from over a kilometre away. I'm eating in a bar in West Jerusalem, and I turn to the Israeli waitress and say the two words, "suicide bomber," and she nods, and her right hand moves involuntarily to her mouth. I give her more shekels than the meal can be worth and set off running up Jaffa Street towards a great dirty smudge of brown and grey smoke that's streaming upwards. I get there just as police and soldiers pour out of jeeps and cars. Outside the Sbarro restaurant, there lies a plump lady with her brains through her head, a child, perhaps 3, perhaps 5, so mutilated its eyes have been blasted from its face. It is the atrocity every Israeli has been waiting for. A Palestinian suicide bomber, a crowded, air-conditioned pizzeria just before 2 on an oven-like West Jerusalem afternoon. There's blood and glass all over the street, on the stretchers of the Magen David ambulances, on the faces of those who have survived. I count 2 dead until I see a woman with a table leg in her stomach. 3 dead, then 5. Jens Palmer, a German Stern magazine photographer, counts 10 corpses in 2 minutes. Yehuda, a Jewish holidaymaker from Barcelona, first name anonymity is one of the few things Israelis and Arabs wish to share here in Jerusalem, saw a soldier flying through the air, right up in the air, disintegrating. Many of the corpses are very small. More than half the dead are Israeli children. Unforgivable is the word that comes to mind. What did the child with no eyes do to the Palestinians? My mobile starts to ring. Mobiles are ringing all over the street, on the belts of the cops and soldiers, in the hands of crying shop assistants, on the pavements, on the still intact corpses, harsh shrilling tones and merry jingles and mockeries of Beethoven. Radio Belfast is talking to me. Belfast? I ask myself, amid this butchery, Belfast? One bomb alley talking to another bomb alley? A girl with an Ulster accent tells me that Islamic Jihad have claimed the bombing. There is a fire engine crunching through the glass, and I'm too overwhelmed to take in the irony that someone in Northern Ireland is telling me who blew up the cafe next to me in Jerusalem. Islamic Jihad made a phone call to the Agence France-Presse in Amman. I talk into the phone, the sound of alarm bells and shouting, forcing me to raise my voice in the live interview as I recount what I've seen, and I notice some of the Israelis beside the road listening to me with growing anger. Then comes the day of lamentation. Even before the 14 funerals begin, Israelis know the dead as if they had known their own families, as in a sense they are their own families. Long before 5 members of the Shefa Shudra family are buried at the Givat Shaul cemetery outside Jerusalem, the same Givat Shaul that is or was Deir Yassin. Israelis have all seen the snapshot in the morning papers, a photograph of a bar mitzvah ceremony with 2 small girls in white and a middle-aged man wearing spectacles. Their father, Mordechai, and mother, Tzirli, both came from families of Holocaust survivors, families who had lived through the Nazi horrors only for a son and daughter to be torn apart by a Palestinian suicide bomber in West Jerusalem. Outside the Sbarro pizzeria, Israelis light hundreds of candles. There is much talk of revenge, as there is at the funerals, and the growing anger that Sharon's overnight seizure of Palestinian offices in Jerusalem and the bombing of the Ramallah police headquarters falls far short of the retaliation Israeli